You all set, Jana?
Yeah, I think, are we all set? Yep, we're good.
Recording? Excellent. Well, thank you, and welcome to this regular meeting of the Planning Board of the City of Birmingham for Wednesday, August 12th, 2020. Could we please call the roll?
Scott Clay.
I am present.
Robin Boyle. Robin Boyle.
He is muted currently, as are several of the Planning Board.
All right, I'm going to go through and unmute everybody that's on the board. Hold on.
Robin looks to be unmuted, so Robin Boyle.
Here.
Great. Stuart Jeffries.
Here.
Bert Kosek.
Here.
Daniel Scher.
Here.
Brian Williams.
Present.
Janelle Local Boyce.
Here.
Jason Emron.
Here.
Missy Merman.
Here.
Rachel Hester.
Here.
June Lee. Okay.
Excellent. Nearly a full house. Thank you very much. Let's move quickly along to a review and approval of the minutes from the meeting on July 22nd, 2020. Any comments, questions, corrections, regrets? Seeing none, do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Williams, support by Mr. Scher. Any conversation? Seeing none, we will do a roll call vote, please.
Brian Williams.
Yes.
Daniel Scher.
Yes.
Janelle Local Boyce.
Yeah.
Robin Boyle.
Yes.
Scott Klein.
Yes.
Stuart Jeffries.
Yes.
Bert Kosek.
Yes.
Excellent. We'll move on to chairperson's comments tonight. Again, we are doing another virtual meeting. By this time, I believe we have this well in hand, though I am tempting fate by saying such out loud. A couple of ground rules for tonight. We will have public input. I will describe in a moment how that will occur. When we do have public input, I would ask those that are on the call from the public to go to the bottom command console of their Zoom and use the raise hand function. I am monitoring those that are in the meeting, and I will be looking at that time to call on those that would like to provide input. I will call your name. Please state your name and residence for the record, and then provide your input. The board, just a reminder that all votes will be roll call just to ensure accuracy of the record. And I would also appreciate that if you do have a comment, you either use the raise hand function, or if you're seconding, even just physically raise your hand, just so I can know which person to look toward. Tonight is a study session, and kind of blurring into the review of the agenda. We are here today to talk about the master plan, to re-engage with Birmingham 2040, as it has been nicknamed. We have had 2 meetings on this already, though those were earlier in the year. And tonight we're going to reset. We have a new procedure that we have vetted with the City Commission, a new approach, if you will, to our review of the plan. Tonight is going to be all about the key themes, the 11 or 12 key elements, key themes of this plan, and a discussion at a somewhat high level about whether these plans accurately reflect our wants and needs and desires as a community, or whether we need to make changes. The consultant will provide us with a brief presentation of those themes, at which point I will open it up to public comment for a brief period. This is about public comment first and foremost at the beginning, so I would please, any of you from the public that are here, I would love to hear your input. At that point, we will close public comment and bring it back to the board for a more detailed discussion as that takes us. Jana, anything from a review of the agenda that I have missed?
No, I think you just covered an intro pretty good, too, for the master plan discussion.
Well, wonderful. I aim to please. So with that, if we could, Jana, I will turn it over to you to describe where we head for the rest of the evening.
Okay. Well, as the chairman mentioned, we're going to start with a review of the key themes in the draft master plan. And we do have our consultants here, Matt Lambert from DPZ and Sarah Traxler from McKenna, and they are here to walk us through some of or all of the key themes. As the chairman mentioned, we did have to shut down our public comment period when the quarantine started and everything kind of got shut down. We decided to regroup. We we had a joint meeting with the City Commission in June, came back with a new plan on how to start the public input sessions back up because we don't want to put it on hold indefinitely, and nobody knows, of course, how long this pandemic's going to last. So we did have a new procedure that was set in place for reviewing the draft master plan that we have right now. It's the first draft, and it was included in this packet for anyone member of the public who wanted to read it. We're going to go over the main themes tonight, which is a good way of bringing us back and summarizing all of the things that we're going to be talking about over the next couple of months. And I will turn it over to Matt for a presentation. Matt, I will make you a co-host so that you
Great.
can
I was just going to ask you.
put your screen up. There you go.
Perfect. Thanks, Jenna.
You're welcome.
Let me just share this out.
Sarah, I'm going to make you a co-host too, just in case you need to put anything up.
And I'll just add a short note, which is it went out on our list, but not everybody's on that. You can get on the mailing list at thebirminghamplan.com, and on there recently was an update of the schedule that's also been shared by the city, and a note that we'll be sharing out by the end of the month, what we call neighborhood packets, which is essentially boiling down some of the content and recommendations within the master plan that are specifically focused on neighborhoods. As part of that, it also includes providing the individual maps, with street names and in a way that's not so much split from page to page, but also pulling out the recommendations so those are easier to find and not so mired in dialogue. So that'll be out later this month. So on the themes, we've recently discussed this, but it's important to get into detail and have a discussion from planning board. I'll try to go through this fairly quickly so that there's more time for discussion. That's really where the meat of this should be. The first theme really is reinforcing neighborhood identity, and we've been talking about that since really even before this process got started here. We suggest that neighborhoods are an organizational touchstone for the community, helping to orient and relate households, institutions, and amenities of parks and schools and businesses. Neighborhoods are really what build a city. And even in the 1980 master plan, we saw and recognized discussion of the same types of areas of the city, and that there are different considerations in each area. And so we use that as the starting point to say that we should really discuss neighborhoods at that scale. And we talked a lot about history of neighborhood planning, history of Birmingham, bringing in Emily Talon during the charrette. And here the key component is to establish what we feel should be official boundaries. There's discussion in terms of what the terminology should be. Either way, so it's really a means of analyzing regulations and approaches to change over time, or reinforcing the identity of the place, to define the structure for decision making. Evaluating regulations per neighborhood. We get into this a little bit later, but there's certainly mismatch in places between what the zoning directs people to build and what the character of the neighborhood is at present, and that causes a lot of conflicts. And then to evaluate other programs per neighborhood, like art in public spaces, for example. Is there sufficient park space per neighborhood, and so forth. So the main theme really for a lot of this is reinforcing neighborhood identity by looking at these various topics. The next theme, if it wants to change for me, which it doesn't. Okay, I get to be the one with the technical problem. The next one is to encourage neighborhood social systems. And here we talked a lot about the Chesterfield and Maple small retail center, and the fact that Birmingham still has a few others, but has had more in the past, and over time they have gone away, and regulations don't really allow those to reemerge. Here our description is that residents, new and old, have reported disappointment and lack of new relationships with neighbors. So we heard this a lot in our group interviews and one-on-one interviews. and really, it's not just a Birmingham thing. This is happening all over the country. And while planning can direct change for society, there are traditional structures of neighborhoods and how cities were structured, which is actually how Birmingham was built over time. And those can be reestablished or encouraged through land use and investments in streets and parks. And so this is really focusing on the structure of neighborhoods from a land use perspective, encouraging small neighborhood retail destinations like the one mentioned at Chesterfield and Maple, and really controlling those to ensure that they're not getting out of scale and spilling over parking everywhere and causing all the problems that you might get in other larger sort of retail conditions. Ensuring there's access to parks from each neighborhood that's a social space that people need and interact in. Improving streets and sidewalks to encourage walking and biking to those destinations is really a goal of where improvement should be prioritized. The third theme is to retain diversity of age and family structure in neighborhoods. We found it quite interesting just looking at the census data that age diversity is pretty broad in Birmingham, and that's very important for schools and other systems in the community. And this distribution of age and family structure supports neighborhood businesses and institutions as well. We heard also from a lot of local institutions that they have declining membership and participation and really need to be sort of reinserted in the community to fulfill that, the role that they have in the past. Here, we're looking at some housing issues. Retain older adults with smaller houses that have less maintenance requirements, but don't require them to necessarily move out of their neighborhood. Retain families with more housing availability and diversity of housing price points. Retain younger adults with some additional attached and multifamily housing options, but at a small scale. And retain neighborhood character and stability by ensuring new housing is located and designed to enhance identity. And in this, we're looking at what is the scale that you might have some additional types of housing, but ensuring that it's not willy-nilly anywhere in the neighborhood, anything goes, but really thinking closely about where change might occur and where change should not occur, really from a structural standpoint of neighborhood structure. The fourth one is to expand the range of housing options across the city. That's really similar to the prior one, but the prior one, we really don't want to lose this focus on preserving neighborhood fabric. We've heard quite a bit about that. In this case, we're talking about the whole city, and this is really about lifestyle choice and attainability, expanding housing options. We've heard from older folks, from younger folks, from families, from singles. A lot of people have discussed this that we've been in contact with in the community. And while the new housing is really an issue on the neighborhood level, there's a goal of more housing overall in the plan. And if you look over on the city, the goal that we've discussed is to increase multifamily in the mixed-use districts, and especially downtown. There's a lot of discussion about how there's parking that's not used at all at night downtown, and there's ways to change the economics of housing to really increase housing downtown. But there's obviously other mixed-use districts that can generate a lot of capacity. And then carefully adding some missing middle housing on major thoroughfares like Maple and secondary thoroughfares, potentially like Lincoln. And then allowing for accessory dwelling units to add housing and some secondary incomes in neighborhoods, but without changing the character of the neighborhood. Of course, well, in the prior slide, which now I don't know if I can navigate to. Yeah, in the prior slide here, this image is of a small multi-unit building that exists in the city. Very, very nice. Fits in with the neighborhood. Isn't really overwhelming. It's not what people think of when you say multifamily. So there's ways to do these types gracefully, just like accessory units. So number 5 is to more closely regulate housing to retain neighborhood scale and intensity. And this is what I discussed before about the sort of mismatch between zoning, because as expected, plenty of people have identified this issue of new development being out of scale with the existing housing in neighborhoods. And we've discussed expression of housing style and so forth and keeping that open. But really, if you look at the numeric standards, setbacks, heights, and so forth, there's not a correlation between zoning and the existing character of neighborhoods. So here I recommend some key components are revising those standards, specifically including lot coverage, to limit most of the increased housing intensity of the seams, and to find ways to incentivize the renovation of existing homes with additions that retain the neighborhood scale rather than always ending up in a reconstruction situation. You can't really control that so well, but you can incentivize it. 6, and maybe these last 4 or 5 have really been on population, right? 6 is about gracefully absorbing the projected population growth. There was a lot of discussion of how much growth should be absorbed. And as we got into in many previous discussions, the more you restrict growth, the higher prices become. It's really a balance. You don't want growth to overtake the character of place, but if you restrict it too much, then the price goes up and your family composition sort of falls apart. So, here the city's growing, and how to accommodate that is really a key decision. I just discussed some of the pieces of that, and we're recommending a balanced approach, accommodating most of the new growth in the mixed-use districts, especially downtown, and the remainder along major streets. But it's still a question to grapple with community-wide. And really, again, it's about retaining the character of the existing fabric in the core of the neighborhoods and finding the places where and how growth can be successfully accommodated and what form. Number 7 is to provide equal access to civic amenities and quality infrastructure across the city. And really looking at the neighborhood by neighborhood basis, we have a better means of analyzing how which places have access and which places do not, which neighborhoods have more infrastructure problems like flooding or unimproved streets than others. So here, we think it should be pretty clear that that each area, each neighborhood should have safe and convenient access to parks, schools, services via walking, biking, and driving, and have well-maintained streets, sewers, and stormwater. So in this, we want to look at evaluating access to amenities on a per neighborhood basis and investing in areas that are of greatest need. Some places have great park access and others have none. So that should be a means of prioritizing investment over time. There's flooding and stormwater issues, but there's also solutions on a neighborhood basis. And there's places that those investments are needed more than others. For example, do you invest in some bioswales to deal with some of the issues of flooding that can be solved in that manner? And then evaluate streets and sidewalks and crossings on a per neighborhood basis, looking at places that need the most investment. Number 8 is to encourage multimodal movement throughout the city, especially in walking and biking. And a lot of other places, you hear the term multimodal, it means transit, and really, keying back to the multimodal plan for Birmingham, the focus is really heavily on biking and walking, with some accommodations for transit because we know the region doesn't have a lot of it. But it's very important, this photograph I took walking around town. And here is a family, and one person is going ahead and corking the intersection so that it's safe for the family to cross the street. Should they be riding on the sidewalk? That may be safe for them, but there's not a lot of accommodations. So here we want to determine how to prioritize the improvements. And we had recommended a neighborhood loop that connects a lot of parks and civic amenities like schools together, and ways to connect those into downtown and other districts. Because otherwise, where do you choose to make the first, second, and third investments? And then to increase safe crossings of larger road, such as the pedestrian refuges that are newly installed along Maple, and as we'll get into later, safe crossings of Woodward. And then to ensure bike routes have adequate facilities and connect to the outside community. There's a lot of other trails and longer bike routes. And along Maple and in downtown and Woodward, there are bus service. There is bus service, but there's not shelters in most places. So looking at ways to provide accommodations for transit access as well. Number 9 is to reinforce or establish unique identities for the mixed-use districts in the city. Right now, you sort of think of downtown and the Triangle District and the Rail District, but active mixed-use areas are successful only for a certain length, and then their character changes. You know, malls were designed in this way. That's why there's a certain length for a mall, and they've got anchors on different sides. And downtown, if you include South Old Woodward and North Old Woodward, is much larger than this. And you know the character of North Old Woodward is different from the sort of Maple and Woodward core, and South Old Woodward sort of hasn't determined its character yet, and is suffering. And one of the issues that we identify here is that there should be a differentiation between these to focus on the character difference in these areas and encourage the expression of that character, and the core to really span over Woodward by thinking of downtown as being on both sides. So, you know, this has over time this idea of rebranding to change perception, to establish different standards for the districts. You kind of already have that between downtown and the Rail District, but there's clearly a scale difference in North Old Woodward, for example. So you should really look at how the standards differ to reinforce character and ensure that there's parks and public art and good streetscape, adequate parking, and a diversity of uses in each of the districts to promote their success. Number 10 is to promote private development in underperforming mixed-use districts with public investment. And, you know, we know for a while there's been the hope that the Triangle District would change, and the Rail District has some pretty substantial zoning allowances, but without the addition of public parking, really nothing's happened. Not much anyhow in these areas. Some cool stuff, little things, but not the vision that has been put in place. And also the pedestrian environment isn't great in either district. So there needs to be improvements to sort of kick off that private investment. Private investment often looks for that public investment in streetscapes, and in many places it may not be parking, but Birmingham's done really well in the past by investing in parking to achieve that change. So I think I listed most of what we have down on here, except for the South Woodward Gateway, which is really an interesting district, but private development's not going to take the sort of first bite at that until something is chosen to be done on the city side. Almost at the end. So 11 is to actively support sustainable development practices and the operation of businesses. You know, the natural resources and beauty are really assets to the city, and walking the Rouge Trail is really wonderful, popping in from downtown and out in the neighborhoods. It's a great asset. But then there's also a desire to have more sustainable practices in development and for businesses in the city. So some of the components here are to repair the banks of the Rouge, some of the trails in the Rouge, reduce stormwater runoff in the neighborhood scale, and deal with stricter standards for development so that new development doesn't create more runoff. Improve the ability of recycling, in parks and public spaces throughout the city, more availability in the mixed-use districts, look into composting practices, and then investigate some or incentivize sustainable practices in businesses such as compostable containers and recycling and compost. And then look at the municipal practices, both in the facilities, what's how well are the buildings performing, and how does the city sort of operate on a day-to-day basis. And we, in the charrettes and workshops, we like to point out that we were given styrofoam cups and little water bottles, and we thought that was quite a waste, and really indicative of saying, hey, we can make changes by changing the policies of how we operate. And then the last one, which was always core to this, and I'm glad that Paula brought it up, which is to bridge the Woodward divide. And so we hadn't written this one up before and added it in here after that discussion. So just like in many other cities, Woodward, a major regional thoroughfare, cuts through the city and has really divided it. And really by reducing the car-centric design of the roadway, improving safety, and influencing the perception of the public, and improving crossings, then you can start to make that change. So this is advocate for, and in some cases fund, where necessary, a reduction of vehicle travel lanes, the width of the lanes and speeds throughout the city. During the charrette, we spoke with MDOT, with an MDOT representative, and they felt that the traffic volumes with 75 would be reduced and that the road could be tamed, but they don't have any money, like most DOTs throughout the country. But they said they would be willing to consider changes if they weren't the ones that had to pay for it. But it's very important for the city to be able to connect across that. Some of that's in improving the streetscape as well, especially in the South Woodward Gateway, where there's barely a sidewalk, and you may be walking across the parking lot to the sidewalk up by the building and back. And you do need numerous safe crossings for pedestrians and cyclists, and longer signal times for those. But also investments in the Triangle District discussed before really help the perception that downtown is on both sides and Woodward goes through it, rather than right now the perception is that Woodward goes by it, right? And so you're perceptually in the passing by mode and the bypass mode, and not in the sort of slow down and respect my environment mode. And then reimagining some major intersections. So we said Maple and Old Woodward. There's also the Old Woodward, Big Woodward intersection, which is really a problem. So that's it. I hope that wasn't too long, but I wanted to leave as much time for your discussion as possible.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Appreciate that. We will be back to you. I do want to open it up to the public before we go to the board. So now, members of the public, if you are interested in commenting on these major themes, there were 12 of them that Matt just went through. We would love to hear any and all input you have. Please, again, use the raise hand feature in the center console, and I will look through the participant list to call on anybody that is interested. I see one hand going up. We will go to, hand went down. Let's see. Would anyone from the public care to comment on their input related to any of these major things? I see a Norm Cohen. Mr. Cohen, would you like to comment?
Yes, I would like to comment on the accessory dwelling unit proposal.
Could you please, just for the record, your name and address, just so we have you properly noted, please?
Sure. My name is Norm Cohen. I live at 900 Bird Avenue. I've lived here for almost 30 years. Obviously, a single-family home. It's a 40-foot wide lot, 120 feet deep. I'm very much opposed to the accessory dwelling units. On either side of me, there's already two-story garages that were built in the last 20 years. It's really affected my privacy and definitely the view. I do not want to see a multifamily environment where I live. That's not why I bought in Birmingham. That's not why I bought a single-family home. I think that affordable housing is important, and I think the city should make some arrangements for that, for affordable apartments, but not put it in single-family neighborhoods. It's going to be a traffic problem. It's going to be a noise problem. It's going to be a security problem, parking, privacy. It really wrecks the view. It really disturbs my my sense of isolation that I had at one time. it's ironic that there's just somewhat concern now about affordable housing when they tore down all of these affordable houses that were surrounding me, these nice, cute little 1,200, 1,500 square foot homes to build these enormous mansions. And now they say they need some secondary income to pay for them. So I just don't feel that it is fair to long-term homeowners in my neighborhood. We just don't want to put up with that kind of environment.
Thank you very much, sir. Before I move on to the next resident, I do want to make clear there was a term used, affordable housing, and I just want to, for the record, the current plan does not discuss affordable housing as defined by the federal government. We are talking about a different level of pricing. However, just for those that are listening, we are not talking about a legal definition of affordable homes or affordable housing. But moving along, Mr. Haig, Andrew Haig. Mr. Haig, are you there? Okay, well, we'll move along. Mr. Wild, Matt Wild, are you available?
Sorry, you guys had me forcibly muted. I couldn't unmute it. So,
Okay,
is this Mr. Haig?
Sorry about that.
all right, I apologize. Okay, Andrew Haig.
Mr. Haig.
Birmingham
Mr.
resident.
Wild, I'll come back to you.
Sorry, yeah, it just took a while. I was trying to unmute about 6 times, nothing happened. So, Andrew Haig, thank you. Full disclosure, I'm also on the multimodal board, which is why I bring that up because it's one of the points in here. So I'd just like to go down through the items one by one, just to give my opinions on them for whatever it's thought of. So just going through the master plan themes. First, neighborhood identity. Yes, but that's kind of to me, it's linked with number 2 rather intimately, because you can't have an identity without having the social system. And the point here is you cannot direct societal change, is what's written in here. And you're absolutely right. It either comes down to a neighborhood wants to communicate with itself or it doesn't. And if it doesn't want to communicate with itself, then you're not really going to reinforce a neighborhood identity because people just don't care. So I find these two connected, and you can't force it. It feels like that's a forced system. So I have grave reservations about them. Number 3, retaining diversity of age and family structure in neighborhoods. Absolutely. The study shows that we actually have a pretty good distribution of that already. So, okay, that's fine. Not really a problem. 4, expanding the housing options across the city. Now, you made a very distinct point just now about affordable housing, and it's not the normal governmental legal description of affordable housing. So perhaps that needs to be rephrased rather carefully to be, and I'm not suggesting I know how to because I don't know how to phrase it, but there should be a better description of that because, as the previous gentleman mentioned, anything that's affordable right now is torn down, bulldozed, and turned into a McMansion, which we have far too many extremely large footprint, way too high McMansions out here. Right now in my neighborhood, the average price for a tear down is about $250,000 to $260,000 just to buy the tear down. So we're looking at over $300,000 just to have an empty lot. This isn't affordable. Look at what's coming. We've got a black swan this year. That's what's happened to our economy. It's not going to recover fast. How many people are going to have $900,000 homes? By the way, 2 of those are for sale in my street at $900,000. So expanding the range of housing options, you have to discourage McMansions. Now, that's a whole rabbit hole by itself. We can get to that. Closely regulate housing to retain neighborhood scale and intensity, linked to expanding the range of options, because to tear everything down to make a McMansion, not very appealing. We've got lots of large footprints, and quite frankly, we're not actually enforcing the 60% coverage rule as it is. I can walk you all to 2 houses within a stone's throw of my house where you'd be lucky if you've got 20% of the land is permeable. I think one of them, it might be 10%. So if you're not enforcing it today, what are you going to do tomorrow to actually make sure that we don't have the problems that this non-permeable surface, large footprint, large garage, large back patio is actually causing? Because it's causing problems. I think everybody that lives around here has seen the complaints online about flooding. It's relatively new. So now moving on, grossly absorbed projected population growth. That's linked to the so-called cost optimized housing. I'll call it that, just for want of a better phrase. What are we trying to achieve here? I mean, if this is something all of you actually truly believe in, then I would like to see every single one of you say, okay, I believe in it personally. I will go and live in one of those houses and make it my primary residence for 5 years and take my whole family with me. Because if you truly believe in it for altruistic reasons, then you should take it, live in it. Put your money where your mouth is. But if you won't commit to something like that, then you're not doing it for the right reasons. You're not doing it because you truly believe. You're doing it for a different purpose. And that's not actually the sense of community, which is points 1 and 2. It's a complete contradiction. Rather difficult to work with. Equal access to civic amenities. We should have that anyway. I actually saw something very recently where somebody's asking for a new park. I thought that was an admirable thing to do. That should go through Parks and Rec and planning. That'd be fantastic. Let's investigate things like that much more deeply. Multimodal, I'm on the board. I'm not going to say anything there. That has its own area. Anything that goes to multimodal, I'll be more than happy to discuss with anybody on those boards. Please feel free to bring it in. I'm really interested. Unique identities of Birmingham mixed-use districts. Perhaps the districts themselves have different reasons why they have different successes. Is it something to do with rents? Is it something to do with the size of the properties? Is it something to do with the size of the businesses, the types of businesses? We need to look at items like that, not just saying, we think it should be this because. What does it need to be? Let it be generated in a different way. It's almost like forcing something to happen. And then that's somewhat linked with private development and underperforming mixed-use districts. Existing mixed-use districts. Let's not try and create new ones. This city isn't even 5 square miles. It's not a big place. I mean, it's a city. Yeah. The village next to where I grew up is bigger than that and is technically defined as a village. So, sustainable development, yeah, we should have sustainability. And Parks and Rec are really trying for that. They have some pretty admirable efforts. And then last one, Bridge to Woodward Divide. That should be number 1. We're a bisected city. It's a very visibly bisected city with east and west and extremely obvious differences. The fact that we've only now got pretty much our first city commissioner from the east side of Woodward is rather painful. That should be the first thing. How do we combine the city? If you're not planning to combine the city first, then you're actually working with 2 cities. We need 2 sets of boards because it's not a unified approach. Combine them first, work from there, and the rest of it will then grow organically. But if you're not going to do that first, the fact is put 12th tells me where the priority is. That's very, very unpleasant for a lot of people. So my thoughts on all of them. Thank you very much for the time. I know I took a lot of time. I do appreciate you giving that to me.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. I believe Mr. Wild had his hand up, and I lowered it because of some technical difficulties. Mr. Wild, are you there? Jan, I see he is muted.
I've been keep getting muted.
There you go. Mr. Wild?
Yes. Hi. I want to thank everybody for giving me this time. And before
if you could introduce yourself for the record.
Sorry, my name is Matt Wildy. I live at 975 Madison. I've been a homeowner here for 7 years. Bought my first house here, but I've grown up in the area my whole life. I'm a proud C-Home alum. Went to Derby Middle School in Harlan. You know, my mother went to school, my grandfather, great-grandparents. So it goes way back for me. So, this is my home. This is what I care about. But the few things I want to talk, and first I want to thank you guys. I know you've done a ton of work. I know you're on the Park and Rec board, and I know you do a lot of time. I know it's not easy. You get a lot of complaints, so I want to commend you and thank you for the time and effort. So kudos. But the couple things that really jump out to me is we keep talking about, the multifamily and putting in more, smaller multifamily stuff. And we talk about the seams and the growth and the absorption and saying we're going to get our population up. But I look at the census since about 1970. We've been hovering around 20,000 people for 50 years. And we already have too dense of a downtown. We have parking issues. And I feel like we had these apartments, we put them on the seams, we get more crowded. That's really going to totally change the feel of our city and of our community. So that's one thing that I didn't like. So I'm the president of the South Poppleton Homeowners Association. I took it upon myself to throw that idea out there to other residents. And they were all they were shocked. They're like, so the idea is to fill in multifamily on the seams, on the big streets. And not one person has liked it, except for two of my buddies who said, I'd only like it if I could invest and be an owner of those properties. So I laughed and I got it. But as a resident with small children, families and neighbors I've talked to, I really would like to just voice that I just don't believe multifamily homes is a huge positive benefit. And the other thing real quick, as Andrew is saying, we got Woodward. We've always had Woodward. And in the last 2 weeks, tragically Saturday night, we lost Wesley, who I've known, for a while. He's walking in that pedestrian spot. He gets hit by a car and a runaway right on Woodward. 2 weeks ago, I'm walking my dog. I'm walking up Woodward. Huge accident. Woodward, Oakland, 20-year-old gets his car knocked into a thing. There's just no easy way to cross Woodward. There used to be a tunnel, for people who don't know, that goes underneath Woodward between Oakland Street on the light there, and it was sealed up. And in my mom talks about it. My great uncles always talk about it. They're like, why'd they seal that? That's how the kids got to school. They avoided Woodward. Seems like a good way to make a few fixes, because they saw it 60 years ago as a benefit. And last thing, we with our unique neighborhoods, something I've noticed in East Grand Rapids, which I thought was great. My brother lives out there, brother-in-law, my sister, who grew up here, they live out there. And he told me the way they do their city commission is one commissioner is picked via defined neighborhood. And I thought, wow, that was interesting. We have defined neighborhoods all throughout Birmingham. And if we allowed one commissioner from each neighborhood, every neighborhood's getting a voice. And that's important, because Poppleton's lacking, over the Triangle District and over there in Torrey, they're lacking. There's a lot of neighborhoods that always lack a voice. So I just thought that'd be something to note. But again, I want to thank you guys for your effort. And I do oppose the idea of putting apartments and condo and multifamily units on our seams. We got to save what's left of our residential single family homes without McMansions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. We will go to Mr. Bloom. We could unmute Mr. Bloom.
Bear with me. I'm just looking.
Yeah, I'm. Can you hear me?
There you go, Mr. Bloom. Yes, please welcome. Please introduce yourself.
David Bloom. I live over on Stanley. Thank you for letting me participate. Andrew Haig, your comments were great and thorough, and I really appreciate the fact and the detail that you came and participated in the detail that you gave. I also appreciated Mr. Wildy's comments. I'd like to go back to, I guess, the first goal or theme that was listed, and that is talking about neighborhoods and that neighborhoods are important, and the plan is built around the neighborhoods. If one actually reads through the master plan, I would say 40 to 50% of the pages in that plan or this proposal are devoted to mixed use areas and the downtown. So even though it says it's about neighborhoods, it really doesn't look like it's about neighborhoods. And I think that's unfortunate. Over 80% of the property taxes in this community are paid for by residents that live in Birmingham, i.e. non-commercial, non-industrial property. And that's from city data. Now, if the goal is to change that ratio, or there's some policy that we want to grow the downtown or grow commercial usage, and I would define commercial almost as apartments, because the owners are going to be paying the taxes and they're going to be a business, then we ought to say that and agree that that's going to be the policy. But this looks like something that a developer, an architect, an urban planner wrote rather than the residents. And when we talk about seams and these other things, I think unless you're an urban planner, an architect, a real estate agent, or a developer, I don't know, find me two people that think that some of these things are really good. And when you first look at the themes, they don't sound bad and they sound good. But when you look into the implications of them, it starts to become really concerning in the first place, because it's my contention that the community really didn't have a lot of input in coming up with these themes. And I think your presentation tonight says that it was directed by the city commission, and I don't recall the city commission discussing and debating what the themes are going to be, and that's what the master plan is going to be. Because then you have the city commission directing the master plan and just saying this is what we want, and hiring the DPZ to put some meat around those themes. When we talk about the seams, to me, we're creating islands, and you're going to be separating the neighborhoods more than joining them. And if one takes a look on 14 Mile Road between Southfield and Woodward on the north side of the street, and there's a lot of family housing, there's apartments. That place looks like a pit. I mean, those houses, the apartments, they're old, they're dilapidated. The grass looks horrible, the trees look horrible there. It's not even like you're driving by Birmingham. So we can't even take care of the seams that we have now, and there's no standards, and we're not holding people accountable for maintaining their property. So how are we going to manage it on Lincoln or Adams or Southfield or anywhere else? I really think that there's a problem there. Also, look at all of the new homes that are being built. They're developers not buying these small homes, and they're knocking them down, and they're building $900,000 to $1 million to $1.5 million homes. And I think what we really need is a moratorium on tearing down any house unless the person tearing that house down is going to be living there. So we need to stop developers from scooping up these houses and building these mansions without a tenant or a resident to live in them. Thank you very much for letting me speak.
Thank you, Mr. Bloom. Ingrid, Ty, welcome. Ms. Ty, are you, can we unmute her? Oh, there we go.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. This is Ingrid Ty. I'm the executive director of the Birmingham Shopping District. I'm also a resident on Catalpa Drive. So I come at this, I guess, with two prongs. So I'll put my hat on. Thanks for your comments, and thanks for allowing me to speak. I'll keep it brief. I just wanted to also echo the comments made on Woodward Avenue, both coming from a resident perspective and also from an economic development perspective. First and foremost, when I talk to some of our business owners in town, we talk about Woodward. One business owner in particular has a restaurant in downtown, and then he's got one also in the Triangle District. And he talks about the fact that he's only 2 blocks away from each of his locations, and yet it feels like you have to cross the Nile to get over there. And it's very true. I think that we would see an increase in economic development in the Triangle District, and even more pedestrian traffic and things of that nature if we were to address that issue. Second, from a residential perspective, I think the walkability would also be improved if we address that. When I first moved here into town 10 years ago with my family, we lived on the east side, and it's a very nice area. What we were renting at the time, when we went to look to purchase a permanent location, part of the decision was made on the fact that there were more parks on the west side. The walkability to downtown was much more accessible. Getting to school was a lot easier, things of that nature. So, I think that goes in, and I think we could see a boost in the quality of a lot of those different factors if we were to address that. And I think Mr. Wildy also addressed there's a tunnel. So there might be some cost efficient or easy ways to get that done. But I just wanted to echo that comment.
Thank you very much. Last round, I see one hand going up. Someone, JMJ. If you could please unmute them, introduce yourself, name and address, please, for the record.
Sure. Hi, this is John Jones. I'm at 887 Ann Street. Been a resident of Birmingham primarily for 20 years, raised 3 kids here. We moved to Ann Street a couple of years back, and there are a couple of, I think, aspects of the plan that concern my wife and I. One, the Haines Street park or quadrant and that neighborhood that looks to be built. And one of the reasons why we liked where we purchased this home is the access to the true downtown. We're only a couple blocks away. And it seemed like this was creating an environment or a neighborhood that was going to be more fixated on my immediate cross alley businesses, as well as kind of promoting on the other side of Lincoln and to the right with the alley changes and some other things that were being proposed. So that doesn't really do a lot for us. We're not really that excited about that. I think we're a little concerned about the alley behind our home and kind of the businesses in the long-term perspective of the ones that are just, right on the other side of us, Hagopian, Sherwin-Williams, et cetera. We actually like the alley. We know a number of our neighbors have turned their garages around to start using the alley as originally intended. We're planning to do the same at some point over the next couple of years. So, I think the plans around this Haines Street Park, which I don't think is necessary, seem to throw a lot of confusion around the longer term viability of businesses. And if the city goes forward and says, okay, this is something that we're going to do over the course of the next 10 to 20 years, we're going to see a dilapidation of the businesses around us before this newer project gets put in place. The other concern that we have is we are on the great old Big Woodward Divide. It literally, you cannot cross Woodward on one change of the light. You can get to the middle, but you really have to hustle to get across the street. And Papa Joe's is probably no more than a quarter of a mile from our house, and it takes probably 20 minutes to get there because you've got to walk 3 blocks to the left, 2 blocks to the right, and then you got to wait for 2 light changes to cross the street. So, I don't know how we could talk about narrowing the street. I think that it's a possibility of narrowing Big Woodward, or a pedestrian bridge, which I think could also tie the 2 sides of Woodward together, which doesn't seem to have been proposed. So those are just a few of the things that I wanted to raise.
Great. Thank you, sir. All right. Looking last call on public comment. I see no other hands up. Looking up and down. So we will bring it back to the board. Thank you to the public for that input. I do appreciate it. Appreciate you coming out and providing your thoughts. I will remind the board as we're talking today and opening our general discussion, which this is a study session, it will be somewhat free form. We need to remember that we are focusing at a high level here. We are on themes. We are not on specific improvements. And while the comments we've heard from the public are certainly valid and important for us to consider, today is about the themes themselves, the overarching principles of whether or not these represent the general direction we want to go, knowing that many of the details will need to be filled in not only by the plan, but in the long-term implementation down the road from there. So with that, I'd like to bring it to the board. Is there anyone on the board that would like to kick us off with any sort of comments? Mr. Williams. Oh, Mr. Williams is muted. We'll make sure that he...
I did unmute him, so I think he might. There we go.
Notwithstanding what you said, number 12 is a very specific
Fair enough.
recommendation. I want to take it to number 13, specific recommendation, and that is, I think, in light of the relative upheaval in Birmingham a couple of years ago, and it is inconceivable to me that we would proceed forward with a master plan without figuring out how to deal with North Bates. So I really think, and Stuart mentioned this, I think at the last meeting, that this should be on the list. I'm not suggesting how we would do it, but it strikes me that one of the concerns from the public was the lack of public participation or involvement in the planning process, and certainly the planning board itself was not in the formative stages of the Bates Street project. So I would like to see that added. Just as important to me as number 12. I suppose you could add, because we run into this several times, you could also add parking on the list if that's important, or you could add how to handle what I view as sometimes excess public property. For example, I think there's municipally owned property along Southfield near 14 Mile Road, and yet the city seems constrained, can't sell it, can't deal with it. So it sits vacant. And it's not really developed as a park or anything. One additional comment, and this only occurred to me after I moved to a street called Latham, and that is, and this will go back to Mr. Haig and the multimodal board, but it also is on our list, and that is, and it is number 8, I guess, on the list. Multimodal movement. There's a street called Latham that runs parallel to Southfield. It has no sidewalks. It permits parking, and it is suggested as a major bike route. Cars going to and from Beverly Hills stay away from Southfield. They drive right in front of my house now. We've got pedestrians in the street. We've got bikes in the street. We've got cars in the street, and we've got parking. And I know that several of our board members have commented on the lack of uniform sidewalks in some areas of the city. Birmingham Farms has no sidewalks. And so to say you're going to put a major bike route through here is nonsense. You're going to have pedestrians, cars, bikes, and parking all in the same area. So that's a comprehensive solution, but you simply can't, as the plan did, or some parts of the plan, identify routes without taking into account that some of these areas don't even have sidewalks for pedestrians.
Sure.
But I think the major thing I think that we need to include within the plan, just from a public participation standpoint, is a Bates Street's property. I'm not suggesting we're going to do anything with it, but it ought to be on the list.
So, Mr. Williams, just to try and keep this at a theme level, I mean, I understand your point about Latham, but in general, however, do you agree with the idea that we need to encourage multimodal movement?
Yeah, but we also need to do it consistent with not creating jams in the streets. You can't have a bike route in an area where you don't have a sidewalk. It's that simple.
But the theme is accurate.
The theme is accurate. So the city puts sidewalks in, they can have all the bikes they want.
Other board members' comments? Stuart, Mr. Jeffers. We need to unmute him, please.
Am I free?
There you go, Stuart.
All right. So a few comments. It's been mentioned at least once about prioritization. I don't think what we have now is I don't think we prioritize these 1 through 12. I don't remember doing that. But I don't disagree that it might not be it might be a good idea at a point in time. Just because, much like we have a list in the planning board of how do we tackle different issues and that the city commission gives us, I think it'd be good to have one for the city going forward of, kind of where do we want to, because we can't do everything at once, obviously. Where would we like to prioritize? So that's point 1. 2, I'm still bothered with that we don't have woven into the theme accessibility for all. It was brought up Woodward. I mean, I sit there, we just approved another senior facility on that side, on the east side of Woodward. And if they want to come to town, they risk their lives. And I sit there and watch this all the time. It was pointed out, you cannot make it all the way across. So then you're in that no man's land right in the middle of a median. And yeah, I can't think of too many people who've gotten picked off there, but it's you go do it. It's not a great feeling. I mean, you want to get the hell out of there as fast as possible. So I really think, so we're trying to keep elderly here in our city. We want them to feel comfortable and all. And then yet they can't do that. They can't use the beautiful trail that Matt described through along the Rouge River, because unless you're sturdy of foot, you get to pay for it, but you don't get to use that either. And I have a real problem with that. One of my other hats is working with our senior community center here too, and that's a big problem there too. Third, it was brought up that where did some of these ideas come from? I sat through every charrette. I think I missed one. It happened to be located very close to my office, so I was able to pop down for a lot. These ideas came up. These things weren't dreamed up. So I'm comfortable with that. I don't agree with everything, but I think the public had a lot of putting this together. Now, hopefully we get even more public as we go through these, because I thought there was a lot of good points tonight. Two more things real quick. We talked about seams and multifamily, and I'll weave this with 14 Mile. 14 Mile is a pit because there's no incentive. Nobody with a single family, and I've shown these homes, and I've heard their comments. They don't want to have a single family house on a road where the kid happens to run on the street. They got one less kid. And so that is where where a multifamily with, condition can work. You can incentivize somebody to actually put up something attractive, well-maintained, because you give them a different ability to do that. Right now, you look at the houses. People have built brand new houses on that street, and they sit, and then when they do sell, they sell for fractions because it's the seam, and that by definition. And so you need something that works on a seam. Then lastly, it was talked about our population. We actually were at 25,000 people in the 70s. So we're down from our peak 20%. The numbers that we've talked about trying to incorporate more people in our city isn't because we're trying to become the biggest city. It's from Southeastern Michigan Council of Governments, SEMCOG data, that says the area is going to grow this much, and our fair share, or however they do it, is a couple thousand people. So where do you do it? When we were at 25,000, it was mostly because the family unit size was larger than it is today. That's it.
Other board members, Mr. Kozik.
So they're sort of details, but just general comments based on my notes. Some of these I have mentioned before. The idea of the seam and the boundary defining neighborhoods, I still don't understand that. I think Birmingham is small. I like the fact that there are not seams and boundaries. I think we're one community, and my preference is to blur those lines. And if I live on this seam and I'm on the east side and someone else is on the west side, how are we different? We may have our own little neighborhood because we enjoy each other or something. So I don't get that. I'm not in favor of the accessory dwelling unit. Certainly not something that could be a rental unit. It's challenging enough for us to control single family rental units and, stick it in somebody's backyard. I see benefits in a perfect world, but I see a lot of adverse, elements, and those far outweigh, the benefits. And then we also need to recognize that we have 40-foot lots and 45 and 50 and 60 and 75 and 100. Our neighborhoods are different. So maybe it's appropriate on a 50-foot lot, on a 100-foot lot, or maybe it's not on a 40-foot lot, but, the 100-foot lot is a $2 million house. Do they really need some secondary income by sticking somebody in the backyard. So I'm afraid of that. I'm curious about how to incentivize the renovation type projects versus new construction. You know, does that get into taxes? How do you do that? I'd like some conversation, discussion about that. I agree. Woodward is not that everything that was listed was in some type of priority, but it is the thing that does divide us as a boundary and needs to. We've had at least 2 entries that I'm aware of in the last few months, and so that should be highlighted in this master plan. And I'm always also curious about design controls relative to, I presume it's setbacks, heights, form. I like the concept. I'm just curious what that might look like, and coincidentally, I remember Andreas Dewani when he was back a few years ago for, I think, a weekend doing a little tour and making some comments. One of the comments he made is that maybe you need to allow building footprints to grow on existing homes so that you can accommodate first floor bedrooms and allow people to age in place. And so, it's all hard stuff, if you're starting from new and you have deed restrictions and you can have all these architectural controls, and it's obviously much more complicated in a community like ours. But so just some general comments based on what I've heard today.
Ms. Whipple Boyce. There we go. Please, Janelle.
Okay. So generally speaking, I'm very comfortable with these 12 themes, and Brian's suggestion of adding a 13th. Not getting into the weeds tonight, as we've been instructed. There are many things within each one of these different 12 themes that I have questions about. Things that I'm like very much, and other things that I think I don't like very much. And I suppose that might be the case for all of us in different spots of this whole plan. But generally speaking, which I think was your question early on, do the 12 themes seem appropriate? And in my opinion, they very much do. I don't think they were specifically directed by anyone. Rather, they came out of a whole lot of work that the team did, and through interviews and threats and meetings and all the information gathering that they did. And being a part of most all of that along the way, I can recall all of these points being important to different groups of people at different times throughout that very long and detailed process. So I'm very comfortable with these 12 themes. When we have an opportunity to get into the details, more specifically, I have lots of questions, but overall, I like how it's been presented.
Yeah, thank you. Other comments, Mr. Scher?
So in thinking about the themes, particularly the ones that relate to the neighborhood, I'm having a little bit of trouble in that they kind of run together, and as somebody noted, they relate to one another. And perhaps it's wording of the headings, but so let me just, and I tried to find a brilliant way to kind of summarize it, but I couldn't do it, so I'm going to have to take a little bit more time, I'm afraid. So if we look at the first one, defining or reinforce neighborhood identities, I'm not quite sure what that means. On the one hand, if it means the sort of lot size setbacks, I understand that that's land planning. I think that's appropriate. If it's a question of having, almost a checklist to make sure that if we have a policy about parks, every neighborhood is addressed and no person is forgotten, I get that. If it links more to the social identity issue, which I think is the second one, then I'm a little bit more troubled because I'm not sure how, within any of the areas, whether we call it Pierce or Poppleton or what have you, different streets over the 30-some years I've lived in town have identities that have changed based on the people who live there and on houses that get rebuilt. So I think we want to be careful about what a net identity is. Neighborhood social systems, I'm uncomfortable with that. I don't really understand it. I mean, I appreciate the reference to saying we need to focus on land use strengths and social structure. I wonder if that really is an appropriate theme. Specifically, I can remember walking around neighborhoods in Detroit and Windsor and Denver that were older neighborhoods of 1910, 1900, 1920, where you can see scattered throughout the residential neighborhoods what had been small retail establishments, which had been abandoned just because of the nature, abandoned and converted to residences, because of the nature of the the retail environment. Given those changes, I'm not sure that fostering neighborhood destinations any more than we already have, makes a lot of sense. I like the theme of managing growth, and I think that the notion of retaining diversity of age, family structure, range of housing is appropriate. I think we have to be careful, as a couple of people have mentioned, to define what increased housing units along the seams might be. I guess I've said this before, but I encourage everybody on the board to take a look at the little cluster of houses on Southfield Road between Brown and I think it's Frank, if I remember right, where there's 4 or 5 houses in a little courtyard that have 4 or 5 units where one might normally sit. Very attractive, very appropriate within the scale. Been in my neighborhood for years, no problem. And that kind of setup, which is I think one of the drawings that the team had, I think would fit some of what they called the low intensity seams. So I'm not bothered by that. I think that the city can and should. I think the report suggested there's a couple thousand more units coming just by natural pressure. I think we can plan for that, and I think it can be handled really very nicely. The problem of, I forget the exact name they use, but encouraging neighborhood scale, I really think we need to do some more thinking about what that theme is, because I think I walk through some streets in my area, and I live at Southfield and Lincoln, where 3/4 or more of the street are new houses, and you've got 2.5-story houses, 30 feet tall or whatever the cap is, next to original 1950s, 1960s ranches that are 1-story, 18, 20 feet tall. That original neighborhood's gone. Maybe the synoptic survey that they mentioned, gives us a little more guidance, but it's a little bit too simple to say we need to preserve neighborhood character because the neighborhood character's changed. So, perhaps there are some areas that we want to designate as, or think about designating as historic, even though they're, newer than some of us on the board are old. And maybe there are some areas we want to preserve or try and preserve the old character, but some of the neighborhoods, especially in my area where people have complained that McMansions are, out of proportion, hey, that train's gone. They're there. Just one other thought, there are bigger, more intense cities, but Hong Kong bridges neighborhoods through bridges over great big giant streets, not unlike our big Woodward. And I'm kind of thinking that that's a more desirable avenue, if there is such a thing, than tunnels which had their day, and people stopped using them for a variety of reasons.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Other comments? Mr. Boyle.
Well, just on the Woodward story, which I think is valid, and I support the notion that we should really give some thought to this whole question of how the city is impacted by Woodward Avenue. From my opinion, the challenge is not the fact that there is 4 lanes; it's the speed of the cars on the road. And if we could find a way, in fact, I think it's not beyond our capacity to work with the powers that be, of which we are part, to try and bring the speed down on Woodward Avenue. If I was to open my window where I sit right now, Wednesday before what would have been the Dream Cruise, you would hear the cars driving up and down Woodward Avenue. It's not the volume, it's the speed. And I would urge us to give that some serious thought as part of this plan going forward. If I might take the next few moments to talk, however, about what I think is a key element of this, and that is combining, I don't mean to in any way rewrite the plan, but I think themes 3, 4, and 5 come together to address the question of what will our wonderful city be like as a residential suburb over the next 25 years? That's the question, really. All the people who spoke were very pleased with their neighbourhoods. They like where they are. They don't want to see great change, but change is a-coming. And change is here, as we've just heard from Mr. Scheer, as he rightly said. Opposing introducing some sort of physical control, I think, is going to be very difficult. We've already done it. We've put a limit on the height, and we've put a limit on the lot coverage. Now, maybe we do need to do some research, as Mr. Haig suggested, that perhaps we're not policing the lot coverage sufficiently enough. But that being said, I think there's another bigger issue, and that is to do with the word, and I will use the word, Mr. Chairman, simply because that is what it is about. And that is, how do we encourage folks to come to Birmingham who have more of a modest income? It is about affordability. If you don't mind, I'll take 2 minutes to give you some hard numbers. The median income in Oakland County is $80,103 per year. That is the area median income. Affordable housing, or slightly more advanced housing, which is often talked about as, quote, the missing middle, is often seen as people who have an income which is 80% of that number, which is about $71,000, up to 120% of that number, which is just over $96,000 of an income. Put it into other terms: school teachers, nurses, people who work in administration, not necessarily in the C offices, but people who have solid jobs in a whole variety of different areas. These are the people that we want to, I believe, be attracted to come and live in Birmingham. The trouble is that even at that level of income, it is unlikely they can afford to do it. So let me just take the last minute I have to remind us that if you're at the 80% of area median income, you could probably afford a mortgage of $325,000 with $70,000 down. If you're at 120 of area median income, that's the top end of the missing middle, you could probably get a mortgage of about $475,000 with $90,000 down. That's what people can afford. Are we building stock that would allow them to come to live in Birmingham? The answer is, at present, precious little. And therefore, I do think that some of the proposals in 3, 4, and 5 about looking for ways in which we can bring gracefully, slowly, carefully, whatever term Matt wants to give us, let's bring this into our city in a way that brings these folk into the city to live in the long term. And I do disagree with Mr. Haig. I'd be perfectly happy to have more of that housing, because the picture that was shown, the first picture on our on our screen tonight, is 7 houses from where I live right now.
Thank you, Mr. Boyle. Wonderful as always. I'll throw my 2 cents in quickly here as well, as it seems like everyone's had a shot. I'm so glad you said something, Mr. Boyle. I'm in agreement with pretty much word for word what you just said. I won't reiterate. I'm not throwing anything out as far as the details, but that's not what I'm talking about tonight. So I'm not throwing them out, but I'm not throwing them out yet, because as Janelle said, there are some things in here that certainly are not necessarily what I think is appropriate. And even if they are, they're not appropriate everywhere. And I think that's the key, and perhaps what's causing some of the public to not to worry a bit, because they see perhaps a one-size-fit-all approach when it is not clearly appropriate in all areas. I agree with Mr. Boyle that I generally agree with all 12 of these statements. However, there's a great deal of overlap, as Dan also said. And to some degree, I wonder if the volume of our report could not be, which has been a subject of debate, Mr. Lambert, could not be condensed if we did not take a look at not having 12 overarching themes when they overlap so greatly. 1 and 2 to me are very, very much intertwined. 3, 4, and 5 very much intertwined. I think you could, without getting into the details on it tonight, take a look at these and perhaps streamline a bit. The master plan is a framework. It's not the detailed, answer to all of our problems. In many ways, it identifies them. So I would suggest that you need to do that, if you could, please. And that's not to say I disagree with the thought process, but I think you could really get a little bit more cohesion if you just looked at them in a tighter framework. Number 6, I'm going to push on a little bit related to this graceful absorption of projected population growth. I see the SEMCOG studies. I know how you got the numbers, and I get it. I also know that, as Stuart said, we've not increased our population over the course of the last 40 years. So perhaps instead of a theme that says we're going to grow, perhaps we should take a cue from the residents and have a theme that talks about we are going to manage our population and our growth, whatever that may mean. I don't know that we want 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 more units in our community. We might, as Mr. Boyle said, and Matt, as you said, that the more you restrict, the more the prices go up. So maybe we're fighting against another theme in doing so. But to just assume that we're going to need to accept a whole new set of residential units, I think is a little presumptuous, and I think might scare some of the public. It ties into how are we going to manage our population and growth, and do so in a way that 3, 4, and 5 would support numbers 3, 4, and 5. With regard to Stuart made a great point. Number 7, with regard to amenities and infrastructure, is a perfect area to start talking about whether it's universal accessibility or some offshoot thereof. Is a perfect location to discuss that. When we talk about bridging Woodward, Mr. Boyle, thank you so much. You beat me to it. It is about the speed. Speed, and that is really what we're talking about. I don't like the word bridge in the name of the theme, however. I am not a supporter of bridges or tunnels. That is not what I think we're trying to accomplish here, and while it might be an ultimate solution, it shouldn't be in the darn title. Lastly, I suppose, I'm a little concerned, and frankly, more than that, I do not support adding North Bates as an actual theme. The design of one particular site, regardless of how important it is not a master plan issue. It is a downtown plan. It is a design plan. It is not part of what we're doing here. We have not done any public involvement as far as what people want to see on that site. It's not part of what a master plan is about. And to me, the North Bates property, if anything is done with it, needs to wait until this plan can inform it as to what our community feels we need with regard to residential, with regard to parking, with regard to any other aspects of these things we've been discussing. And once we've identified what we think we need, then we can look at what implementation is. And certainly, one could argue that that is arguably the most looked at site, or one of the most looked at sites in the city. So certainly it would be looked at for implementation, but I don't think that it has any place as a special part of the overall master plan when we are focused at themes of overarching needs and framework of what we want our community to be moving forward. So yeah, I think that was all my notes. Any thoughts about conversation about that? Mr. Wood? Nope. Can we unmute him? Even though I know he's going to disagree with me. Oh. There we go. Mr. Williams.
I'm trying to unmute myself. I think at the end I expressed it that it isn't just the Bates Street property. There's a lot of municipal property, and we've identified a number of, if we're talking about parks and the need for additional parks, the city has property, owns property, and yet can't get rid of it. So we could put that within that context. There are some areas of the city, and I mentioned Southfield 14, where property sits vacant. It's not used as a park. It just sits there. It's a waste. So if we can incorporate somehow within neighborhoods, that's fine. But we need to pay attention to that portion of our charter which precludes the city from disposing of, frankly, excess property. The second thing is I would like Jana to, and I totally agree with Woodward and Speed, but all you have to do is drive south on Woodward, and when you get to Ferndale, the traffic slows down.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I want to know why Ferndale is more important than Birmingham. From a historic standpoint, how did Ferndale wind up with 40-mile-an-hour speed limits, and we have 45 and 50? And the other problem we have, and let's be candid about this, we've got a 2.5-mile stretch running from Oak and Woodward, and the only light is Quarton heading north until you get to Long Lake. And that's where the speeding occurs. And it occurs in the other generation as they hit Quarton. And if they can make the green light, they go zooming right down to Oak, right past Robin's house. It's speed. That's as important, and that's why occasionally people get hit. And there's nothing more terrifying than heading, as I think some of you know, I've said before, there's nothing more terrifying than can't get off of Woodward, heading east or heading west on Maple at Big Woodward with cars zooming by heading south. So I agree with the speed concept. I don't like the word bridge. I don't like the word tunnel. The tunnel was closed because there were incidents, and we didn't need any more underground incidents in Birmingham. I won't go into it, but I was around then, unfortunately, and that's what happened. And we don't need that any more than there was concerned about the bridge at Eaton and Maple for the same reason. Only if it's totally underground, you got a different issue. And we're not going to put a policeman down there 24 hours a day. So I think Robin hit it on the nose. It's speed. And we can talk about Woodward, but I don't know that I want a bridge, but I certainly want to slow the traffic down. Jana, find out how Ferndale pulled this off.
Well, I do have a little insight on that because my understanding was obviously Detroit was always more built up. So was Ferndale, and Ferndale, if I remember correctly, actually had parking in the
in the island.
So people would have to pull in and pull out, and it was kind of forced to be slow, and it was always slower because there was a downtown and there was that parking in the middle. That's what I've been told.
But they don't have the parking now.
They don't.
And they still have the lower speed limit.
What MDOT will tell you is that right now, if they do a speed study, the state law will require them to probably raise the speed limit on Woodward. But if they have a speed limit that's low, they can keep it, but they can't. They are not, because of the way state law is written, they can't actually reduce it if the 80 percentile of people is going at a much higher speed.
Well, we got to do something about it. That's all.
All right, we need to do that speed study during Dream Cruise.
Yeah.
Good point.
Okay. I understand what you're saying, Scott. I think it's a larger issue of dealing with municipal owned property and the inability of the city to effectively deal with it. And I just don't want to go through another 5 years without addressing that issue.
Sure. No, fair point. Fair point.
If we can include it within one of the other topics, which I tried to do, that's fine with me.
Okay. So let me look back at the board quickly. We've each had an opportunity. We've kind of gone, around the horn, so to speak. Not much dialogue.
You haven't talked about the alternate members.
And they haven't raised their hand. I'm looking at them right now, is there any dialogue that we being kind of generated here? Have you heard anything from a fellow board member you wish to talk about or agree, disagree? It seems like we generally are aligned, but it's been decidedly one way so far. Matt, Sarah, do you have anything that jumps at you as you needing a little more clarity to input? I've
got plenty, but I'll wait for Robin first.
Okay, we'll go Mr. Boyle first.
I don't wish to cause trouble, but I was going to put the onus back on you, Mr. Chairman, and indeed perhaps with the consultants as well. Let me say, I quite like the themes that we've discussed. I think we've got a good coverage. Whether we could blend some in the way that you had discussed is possible. My question is, when we close our meeting tonight, what have we agreed on? What will we agree on? I don't mean the detail. I don't even mean the themes. I mean the process.
Well, I'm gonna look at Matt and Sarah right now, but before I say I will, it does seem to me that we have agreed, and the public has not even derailed us in that regard, or taken us in a different direction, perhaps, that the 12 themes themselves are all in some way, shape, or form germane to the discussion. The concerns have been about details, rightfully so. But the idea of the themes does not seem to be debate. From anything I've heard tonight, particularly anything I've heard from the board, for sure. So I would say that we are closing in on a direction, if you will. Though I know that Matt and Sarah may have questions, clarity, and other thoughts they'd like to dive into right here. And then I'm going to ask, before we close the meeting tonight, whatever that may be, I'll ask them and Gianna to help us with next steps. What is our next jaunt on this journey, if you will?
Okay, thank you.
Matt?
Yeah. Well, how about I give you two chunks? There are some good things to discuss from the details that everyone brought up. But I think that Robin's last question was probably most important to discuss first. And I will mention that I am interested in Scott, what you brought up and has been brought up elsewhere about combining some things. So I think we should do that absolutely. But in terms of the process, what we had discussed was to take these themes and maybe they're few combined, but as you review the other sections of the plan one by one, to review the plan from the theme standpoint rather than jumping into all of the various details that might be in the plan or might not, but say how does it achieve or not achieve these themes. So that was what was discussed in terms of looking through the sections on the mixed-use districts and the neighborhoods and so forth.
Mr. Boyle, how does that sound to you?
I like it. I like that. I think it's better than taking the 275-page document and going through it line by line, I think that would get us back to that would get us back the way. I think the challenge, bluntly, Matt, will be on you and Sarah and also Jana to sort of pull out the talking points that you want the board and the public to discuss and put their ideas on the table or on the screen, so to speak, under the headings that you've already given us. So I'm in favour of going in that direction. I've got a slightly different. I'm going to ask my question in the same way. Scott, are we effectively saying, okay, we've discussed our broad themes, our 12. Do we make a motion?
Well, I mean, I am open to the thoughts of the other board members. I might say that might be a little too formal, given that there will be some consolidation, perhaps. And I tend to think that along the way, as we get into sections and we start to compare those sections to the themes, that there's going to be some nuance involved here, I would suspect.
Okay.
That themes will flesh out, the definition of themes may get fleshed out even further as we see it applied in the real world, and may require slight backtracking, and I don't mean dramatic, but even tonight we had a resident mention about 40-foot lots, and I think the entire idea that what is good on a 40-foot lot is also good on 100 and vice versa is I think, rather silly. So we need to be careful not to maybe lock ourselves in my humble opinion. Okay. I do think it would be good for the consultants to make sure that they hear from us whether we are in agreement that these 12, massaged and consolidated perhaps and moving forward, are appropriate and are the direction we want to go. But I'm not sure a formal proceeding would necessarily be needed, though I'm certainly open to the rest of the board's opinion on that for sure.
Can I just reply to you?
Sure.
It was a bit of a leading question. It wasn't really about tonight. Tonight was good. The question is, how do we close the next set of meetings? Because from what I've read and what I'm hearing, our next meeting will be looking at some of the detail that crosses between the 12 themes. Mm-hmm. But we want to basically say, yes, we like what we read in the plan, or no, we don't. But at the end of the day, on that night in October or November, are we going to say, that's the discussion, here's where we are, now we move on to the next set of details. Do you see where I'm going?
Jana, do you have a...
Yes, and maybe Matt or Sarah, you can jump in, but I think keep in mind that this is a review of the first draft. The whole point of all of these public hearings is to get all of these things, get people to weigh in on all of them, and then to see some changes between the first draft and the second draft. And I don't think you need any formal action on individual sections or the plan as a whole at this point. I think we're providing input and commentary on the whole thing, which the consultants will then take back and incorporate into the second draft.
Okay, thank you. That's good clarification. So we're still at this stage of seeking input from the public and from ourselves for discussion, for debate, as we've already had a little bit of tonight. But you don't expect, as we go through, I think it's the next 4 nights, if I remember my outline correctly. Is it 5, 4, or 5? Tell me.
I think it's 3 or 4.
3 or 4.
Okay, 3 or 4. So at the end of that, we're still not going to be putting our hand in the air. We're not saying this is the final.
Absolutely not.
No.
The goal would be that in the new year we would have draft 2.
Fine.
And that is when we're coming back for another dive into this. So I would hope that by the time our next 3 or 4 meetings are up, and we give Matt, Sarah, and the team orders, if you will, directions on what draft 2 is going to look like, we would be able to confirm things we like, be able to say, the things that are, heck no, that is not appropriate. Let's get rid of that flat out if there are any, to avoid having to go back into the weeds on those items. But realize that we are still shaping draft number one.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I...
Mr. Williams, real quickly, and then we'll go to...
Yeah, no, I think one of the things that ought to happen between now and the September meeting is they ought to, our consultants should, and Janice should take a look at the master plan themes, which I think in some sense, as Dan pointed out, needs some, and you have pointed out, Mr. Chairman, needs some consolidation. I think some things need to be tweaked, if not changed, so that we don't get in, we're land use, we're not neighborhood social systems as such. I think some of the naming of the categories is unfortunate. I think they can throw away the bridge as the topic. I think these themes should be revised and presented for the next meeting. And in some sense, if you can combine some of these things as we have suggested, that's where we ought to go, because ultimately we want draft 2 to be more concise and shorter.
Sarah, you had...
Yep. I just wanted to remind the planning board members that we also proposed an additional meeting once you have wrapped your review of the first draft in November in front of City Commission in the following month, which right now would be December. If we were just taking it sequentially, where we would be basically summarizing the direction that the planning board provided to us before we begin revising this first draft. So I think that that's kind of important to think of in the context of, really having a nice, concise summary of the planning board meetings between now and November. And I would posit that it might be most appropriate to revise the themes once we have carried them through the rest of the plan, marching through reviewing it over the next few months, because you're all going to come up with additional kind of nuance reviewing the themes and key objectives.
Okay.
Yeah, and I just want to point out, I agree completely with all that. And I did want to point to something that Stuart brought up, which was, in terms of prioritization, and that's going to be an important discussion, though in terms of the overall process, we considered that to be primarily a second draft focus. The first draft, we really want to get to, what's in and what's out, right, and what's missing, so that in the second draft, we can talk about how you get it done.
Yeah, I like that. Mr. Kozak, I'm sorry. Oh, let's get him unmuted, please. There we go.
Yeah. So I just don't understand exactly how we're going about doing this, because if we're commenting, it's just our individual comments, right? We're not voting as a group piece by piece. So what happens with those comments? Can we have some discussion about some of these things, whether we, generally agree or don't agree, or 51% of us agree and 49% don't agree? I just went back to the first section, reinforce neighborhood identity. So, there's a sentence there that I understand, and then key components. So establish official neighborhood boundaries. So I, as I've mentioned before, I wonder about that. And I know as we go further on these bullet points, I think I understand the purpose. So then it says define neighborhood structure to assist future decision making. I think I know what it means, but this is urban planning speak, I think. But I think what it's suggesting is you create a boundary, and then within that boundary, there's a group of people or something that there's some structure that's established how people within that boundary make future decisions. So is that what we're talking about? Do we accept that? The next bullet point says evaluate regulations per neighborhood. What regulations are we speaking about? And why would one regulation be different in Poppleton Park and Court and Lakewood treat it differently? I wonder about that. And then the other bullet point says evaluate programs per neighborhood. So what programs are we talking about? I just, so again, I don't know if that's getting in the weeds, but I read this, I don't understand it. If I attempt to interpret it, it's not something that I support. So is this the time? Is this the day to have that level of conversation, or are we just throwing out our comments and then they keep showing up in here, and in the end, it's going to be the city commission that decides. So, most of this I think is good, and I don't have an issue with. There are a few things that I just fundamentally, in general terms, don't understand where it's coming from. I participated in those workshops as well. I live in a neighborhood. I talk to people. I don't know where this is coming from and how it benefits us. So general question is, if I just use item number 1 as an example, is this something that are we giving specific direction on? Or are we going to see this? We've seen it now since October of 2019 or something. And again, I don't want to be the only one speaking to this, obviously. I just wonder how others feel and then what happens with it.
Well, I'm going to go to Sarah, and I'll ask Jana and Matt to chime in as well, as far as perhaps their preferred or vision for collecting that sort of level of detail from us. Sarah?
Yes.
Volunteered.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to interject, perhaps a kind of procedural note or just kind of where I am in terms of receiving the information that the planning board has provided. You all will remember that we started your formal review of the draft plan in February. It was actually exactly 6 months to the day ago, February 12th of 2020. And we heard during that meeting, though we were kind of approaching it a little bit differently, a lot of the same comments. So you all, I think, are kind of consistently providing your feedback on these guiding principles, which we've now, kind of referred to as themes, coalescing all the high level concepts of the plan into this list. So what I think is important for planning board members to consider is that, we're taking detailed notes and are consistently hearing these, I think, really kind of recurring ideas about how you wish to reframe, especially, I would say, especially the neighborhood sections and kind of the underlying theory behind our neighborhood planning concepts and ideas for how to implement them. And that we, like you, are super anxious to get to the redrafting process. And that, a big kind of part of our job is to take even diverging ideas and make something of them that is supportable by most. So, consensus 100% across the board is virtually impossible to achieve, but what we're trying to get to is a point of, informed consent on this plan. So I just wanted to remind you that, we've been really diligently taking notes and that it is, frankly, our job and something that we think we're good at in taking all this comment and input and bringing it closer to what you're thinking and talking about.
I think we've discussed a few times internally that boy, we wish we had a first pass revision, because we've certainly heard some repeating comments. In terms of the depth of discussing each one of these, I think for one, Scott, you were looking to open up a little bit of internal dialogue amongst the board, today to talk at a broad level like that. And I think that, Bert's questions right there are part of that dialogue. I think as we get through the next number of meetings, that as it was discussed, refining what is in these themes and what the actual key components are, I think those are going to have to change as we go through this. And starting in the mixed-use areas and then into the neighborhoods and the additional meeting, we'll revisit the details of the themes over and over again. In terms, though, just of the specific questions here, to provide some further understanding of what the proposal is. So in terms of regulations per neighborhood, as an example, we did bring up zoning regulations, the most clear and straightforward ones to talk about, but you also have all sorts of other regulations on the books, whether it's for trees or streets or whatever else. The point here is that the details of different neighborhoods, Derby is different than Poplar is different than Corn Lake and so forth. It's that the regulations that are in place today don't necessarily express those differences from one place to another. Now, it's not the job of the master plan to define exactly what those are. It's more so the job to recommend that the regulations be in the future evaluated, looking at their different impact on different neighborhoods. And it sort of relates to a comment that was made that yes, I like some of these. I like this theme, or let's talk about the issue of the seams, for example. Because of course that's the most controversial. And there was a statement made that yes, I like it, but in some places, Scott, you said this. Some things are not appropriate in all areas. And the whole goal of number one is to try to put a scale at which that can be evaluated. Because if you evaluate it on a block per block basis, you won't get anywhere. And we were looking early on at the size of neighborhoods as they have been defined in various ways. And I think there was a recommendation in a prior meeting to call them planning districts, whatever it is. But the point being that on a block by block basis, these regulations and the programs are things like public art and parks and safety, but also parking regulations and so forth. But there's just different contexts for different parts of the city, and those things should be looked at differently. Now, we're not going to make, in the master plan, we wouldn't say, well, here's what should happen here, here's what should happen there, here's what should happen here. Rather, it's pointing out, here's something that differs from one place to another, and these existing standards, regulations, and programs should be looked at in the way that they impact different parts of the city differently.
Mr. Scher.
I have a couple of one comment that addresses this issue and one more substantive thing. I have seen master plans where the master plan says this area of the city isn't functioning in the way we want. We want to change it from use A to use B over time. What I understood from theme one, where reinforce neighborhood identity, is that we're happy with the uses in the city, and we want to protect that.
Yep.
We want to make it good for the next, whatever the term, 30, 40 years, whatever the term of the planning master plan is. And maybe it's something that we want to be a little more specific about there. One of the things that troubled me, and I echo a number of Bert's concerns, was, well, some of these bullet points imply change, but I think, I'm not sure, I think they're changed to protect, preserve what's there, as opposed to change what's there in the big picture. So that's just one thought for you. The other thing that I think I want to make clear, at least my personal view, is that some of the themes drive other themes, and specifically, given the fact that Birmingham is fully built out, if we really say that we want to extend different types of housing, and if we really say that we want to make sure that there is housing more available to preserve different family structures, different age groups, we are necessarily going to have growth, unless we go back to a 1950s 4 kids per family. And so I think managing growth, I think there was some expression earlier that, let's not get into that. I think it's critical that we have a strategy to manage the growth, whatever that strategy is. So I happen to kind of like the themes, and I think that needs a little bit more refinement to make it particular to different parts of the city. But I think, we should recognize that's, I'll say it a different way. That's not a controversy I think we should duck. I think we should meet it head on.
Okay, good discussion. I'm debating whether or not to counter you on that, Mr. Sheriff, before we wrap things up tonight. But I guess I will just say real quickly, I think it's important to recognize that growth is a potential if we want to satisfy some of those other themes. However, I don't think it's fair to say that it is inevitable. There are ways that certain themes talk about protecting the scale and size of neighborhoods, about incentivizing renovations and expansions as opposed to tear downs and larger homes. We can't assume that we're going to solve a problem of affordability, if you will, with a brand new multifamily, when we could perhaps solve it in areas of the community that already have smaller homes. And perhaps there are things we can do to incentivize those remaining. I don't want to dive into the weeds, but I just think it's important not to assume one or the other, frankly.
I think it's a question of there are presumably multiple strategies.
Right.
But if we want, and I think we do, but if we want to have a city in which all areas of the community have a variety of age, family distribution, that kind of thing, I think there are parts of the city where, we are well served, and the future is well served to think about managing growth.
Okay, no, fair point. Nuance. Mr. Boyle.
Just to pick up on a theme that I just want to get minuted for the consultants. One of our first speakers questioned the order or the prioritization of the 12 themes. I might, if I can, just for the record, say that I think we also do need to consider that. Number 1 and parts of number 2, on my opinion, are to do with implementation. They're to do with how we get things done. They don't address land use, that's correct. They don't address physical issues. They describe and discuss the way in which perhaps we need a better mechanism for involving our neighborhoods and communicating with our neighborhoods and getting things done eventually in our neighborhoods. These are all very relevant things and should be in a plan. But, I'm an old guy and I know where that tends to come in the structure of a master plan. And it's not the opening gambit. I'll just leave it at that. I see a few nods coming from our consultants.
Fair point. All right. Any last comments before we move along? We've got Mr. Kozak. Did you have something you wanted to? Thought I saw your hand up.
We have some really good planners here helping us through this, and I respect that. And as I look at some of this stuff, I feel like we're being teased a little bit. Like we have this problem, we need to fix it. I'd love to have conversations about, we can't be the only community in the United States that has these issues. And so how can they be resolved. So I might question a statement that's in there, but if there was a more detailed conversation about that, and this is how these things can be improved upon, and whatever architectural standards, building form, setbacks, architectural materials, and all of us have been doing, I imagine, a lot more walking than we ever have in our lives over the last few months. And as I do it, I'm walking down streets and I ask myself, going back to Mr. Scher's point, it's like the newer homes, that's the context now, and the other one looks out of place. And some streets feel wonderful and great, and it's all new construction, and for some reason it feels wonderful, and so I feel like we're being teased a little bit, which is probably appropriate. I guess it'd be nice to have further discussion about some of these things to see how they might actually play out, and that might be more convincing for me that all these components are that we're discussing are reasonable.
All right. Any last comments from the board before we move along? No, good stuff. Good input. I appreciate that. I think this was a good session. Matt, Sarah, Jana, thank you so much. Thank you to the public. Jana, any miscellaneous communications, administrative correspondence you wanted to go over today?
Yes, I actually do have one. We did have a request for an administrative approval that I thought I would bring to you informally, if I may. It's regarding 856 North Old Woodward. I will share my screen if you bear with me for a minute here.
That's the Pearl for those of us playing at home?
The Pearl, yes. And I have some lovely pictures I'll share, so you'll know exactly what I'm talking about in a minute.
All right. Mr. Marusic's here tonight?
Yes, he is.
All right.
And I will unmute him. Okay. First off, I can't unmute him. Can you unmute him, Jamil? John Marusic. Because all my people disappeared. Okay, so this is 856 North Old Woodward. What I've got on the screen here is showing what was approved. I want you to pay particular attention to the awnings around the entrance here. This is the west elevation facing North Old Woodward. This is what was approved in 2016. If you remember, this building had several iterations. Architects changed, design changed, etc. So this is what was initially approved in 2016. And then in 2018, if I can get to the next page, this is the building that was approved. And you can see the canopy, awning, whatever you want to call it, over the entry here. It went from the larger, wider format to that smaller, narrower canopy. And now what they're proposing tonight is a request to go back to the larger scale, I guess, in terms of this. And we just want to make sure that this is in keeping with the planning board's idea for design. It's similar to one that was previously approved, but it isn't what came to you before. Just so you know, where it says the Pearl, that would not be written on there because this is not to be considered an awning sign. It's too large to be an awning sign. Just to remind you that when you approved it way back when, one of the conditions of the planning board, and this was, I don't have the date here, I don't think, back in 2016, that the projections of the awnings on the front facade should be the same depth as the sidewalk. So they are proposing to bring this out the full 7 feet, which is what the sidewalk is. And I can show you here. And it's not showing on the screen. Okay, hold on. Well, I don't know how to get it on the screen, I don't think. Let's see. There we go. So you can see here now that they are proposing to bring it out the full 7 feet, which is the width of the sidewalk before you get into the light post zone, etc. So that was one of the conditions of approval. So we just want to know if this is something that you're comfortable with us administratively approving, or if you would like them to come back for design review to the planning board.
Board?
Question.
Mr. Kozak.
What is the material that's proposed and what was it previously?
It's the same, similar material. Hold on, let me,
It's like maybe a metal panel or?
it is metal, yes. It is metal. I'm going to unmute Mr. Marusic. Okay.
That's already done.
Okay. Mr. Marusic, can you discuss the materials, please?
Sure. It's a metal panel. It's a pre-finished metal panel, high gloss. And that's what was originally intended in 2016. And now we're bringing that back to 2020. We're proposing to do so.
I'll just say, I don't have an issue with it. It seems appropriate, attractive. Quality material.
Any concerns from the board?
None.
Oh, Mr. Jeffries.
Yeah, Jana, you said it's not going to say the Pearl. I swear I've driven by this. It's already there. It says the Pearl.
It most certainly does say the Pearl, and that was not approved. It does not mean they put it up, and it's too big to be an awning sign, and they have to change that. They will be taking that one down and fabricating this new one. That'll be the full 7 feet out, the metal panels, without any signage.
Okay. Mr. Marusic, you can't do that kind of stuff, sir.
Yes, I know. I got my wrist on that one, and I thoroughly take responsibility for acting in haste. And, the Pearl is almost ready for certificate of occupancy. We've got 6 reservations. And so I guess we decided at a late date to make this change. We felt it was the right way to go. And haste makes waste. And here I am before you asking for forgiveness and trying to move forward.
He has heard this speech already a few times.
I believe he has. Mr. Jeffries?
Janet, why can't it say the Pearl on it again?
Mr. Dupuy, our sign expert, would like to weigh in on that. I'm unmuting you, Nick. I think, there you go.
Well, I actually didn't want to talk about the sign part, but I will.
Oh, sorry. You're going to now.
I'd much rather he didn't, but go ahead.
Well, the sign ordinance was very recently changed, I think in May, to actually try and help with canopy and awning signage. And the reason that one's not allowed is because the current regulation as it was adopted is that a canopy valance, which is the parallel part, the face of the canopy, if you will, can't be greater than 18 inches in height. And that's much bigger than that.
I did like that it because we have the Dakota and it's got its name on it. And I like when you can identify these things as specific things, and that one has no other thing to demonstrate what it is.
Yeah.
They have other options. They could do a building identification sign or a wall sign or something of that nature. Or if it's going to be on a canopy or awning, then it has to be smaller.
So my other comment, Jana, if you don't mind, I'd just like to throw a wrench in at 937. You had mentioned that the planning board asked way back when that the canopy extend over the entire sidewalk. But since then, as you very well know, the projection into the right-of-way ordinance was written, which would seem to not allow that.
Well, the difference here is that the sidewalk is on private property.
Okay.
The property line is 10 feet away from the building. Our projection would be 7 feet, so we'd be well within the property line.
Yeah.
Noted and accepted.
Yeah, we did go through that a few times.
Good catch. All right, I see no one raising any issues here. Mr. Chair?
Oh, just a quick question on the Daxton's redo of those parking floors. Did the reduction of whatever it was, 4 or 5 or 6 parking spaces impact the valet plan that the police approved?
I'm going to attempt to weigh in on this because I don't believe that the city commission has approved a valet plan for them yet.
Okay.
All right. Well, Jana and Nick, I'm hearing approval.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Marusic. Good to see
Thank
the
you.
project moving along. Nice to be happy to see it open up.
Yes, thank you.
All right, Jana, draft agenda for next time, August 26th, believe it or not.
Yes, if you recall, you set a public hearing for the glazing ordinance, so for those changes, so that'll be on. We also postponed or continued Jack's Car Wash to August 26th meeting. I will tell you that I did receive an email from them today. I hadn't received any updated plans or anything. I did get an email today stating that they finally got some commentary back from MDOT and they will have to make some revisions. So now they're requesting to be moved another month, a meeting or 2 meetings, so that they don't give us the plan. It's at the last minute, and then the engineers and the lawyers don't get it until 2 days before the meeting, which is what's happened in the past. So they are going to be asking for a postponement.
Okay.
And then we did have a new special land use amendment, special land use permit amendment that was submitted for Lux. So that will be on as well. And Lux is looking to expand their restaurant into the storefront to the south. So obviously they're still a bistro. They can't go over 65 seats, but it allows them to spread out a little bit more.
Yeah, it's pretty tight there. Okay.
It is. So that'll be 2 plus the public hearing on glazing. So it still works out at 3.
Okay. Wonderful. Any other business, board? Anything else to discuss tonight before we call it a night? I'd like to thank you for your input. I thought tonight went quite well. Once around, no? Seeing none, thank you very much, and we will call this meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Scott.